On a fateful night in May of 2013, Antelope Valley Hospital in Los Angeles County received an emergency call that would reveal one of the most shocking cases of child abuse ever recorded in California. The emergency center reported a child who had allegedly stopped breathing during play. Upon arriving at the apartment complex in Palmdale, paramedics found 8-year-old Gabriel Fernandez unconscious on the living room floor. Pearl Fernandez, his mother, and her boyfriend, Isaro Aguirre, were trying to maintain an unlikely story. They claimed the boy was playing when he suddenly fainted. One look from the first responders was enough to realize that the reality was much darker. Gabriel's body revealed a horror story. His face was so swollen it was impossible to recognize his features, covered in bruises and deep cuts. Throughout his skin, there were cigarette burn marks, and his skull showed multiple traumas. Most alarming was that his body already showed rigor mortis, completely contradicting the couple's version of a recent accident. In the emergency room, the medical team encountered a scene they would never forget. Each new examination revealed more evidence of systematic torture. Broken ribs in different stages of healing, extensive skin burns, pulled teeth, and, shockingly, BB gun pellets lodged in his body. One nurse, a veteran in emergency care, stated that in decades of practice, she had never witnessed a child with so many injuries. The behavior of those responsible for Gabriel drew even more attention from the medical team. Pearl, instead of showing concern for her son who was fighting for his life, seemed more interested in her cats that had been left at home. Isaro, an intimidating man weighing nearly 310 pounds, maintained a disturbing coldness, going to the absurd length of questioning the boy's sexuality right in the emergency room. What most intrigued the healthcare professionals was the couple's complete disinterest in Gabriel's condition. They didn't ask about his condition, didn't want to know which hospital he would be transferred to, nor showed any sign of concern. This attitude was so alarming that several members of the medical team contacted the police on their own, certain they were dealing with a serious case of deliberate violence. The medical team meticulously documented every injury found, creating a photographic record that would be crucial for the investigation. The examinations revealed 3 distinct brain traumas, a pellet lodged in the lung, and severe injuries to the genital area. The extent of the injuries was such that doctors considered it impossible to count them all. Despite all the efforts of the emergency team, Gabriel's condition worsened with each hour. The prolonged lack of brain oxygenation had caused irreversible damage. Little Gabriel, who had endured unimaginable torture for months, was fighting his last battle surrounded not by a loving family, but by healthcare professionals devastated by his suffering. The hospital's security cameras recorded the moment Pearl and Isaro left the emergency room. They walked out normally, showing no concern for the child they were abandoning. They were arrested a few hours later, but for Gabriel, there was no more hope. 2 days after his arrival at the hospital, showing no brain activity, Gabriel Fernandez was declared dead. We will now dive deeper into the events that preceded this fateful night and the consequences that followed. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, take the opportunity to subscribe now and activate the bell to not miss any case like this. Gabriel Fernandez was born on February 20th, 2005, in Palmdale, California. His birth, which should have been cause for celebration, was marked by abandonment. Pearl Fernandez, his mother, showed rejection from the first moment. Gabriel was her 3rd child, the result of an unwanted pregnancy. In the maternity ward, she was already planning her departure. Just 3 days after giving birth, Pearl made a call that would change Gabriel's initial destiny. Her uncle, Michael Lemos Carranza, and his partner, David Martinez, had shown interest in raising the baby. Pearl didn't hesitate. She handed over the newborn to their care, referring to her son as their problem from then on. The next 4 years would be the only truly happy ones in Gabriel's short life. Under the care of Uncle Michael and David, the boy flourished. Photos and videos from this time show a radiant child, always smiling, surrounded by love and attention. The couple provided not just the basics, but also the emotional stability and affection that every child deserves. In the home videos preserved from this period, Gabriel can be seen playing in the garden, learning his first words, celebrating birthdays, common moments in any child's life, but which for him would be fleeting treasures. Even distant from his biological mother, Gabriel frequently asked about her, demonstrating an unconditional capacity for love that would later become painfully ironic. This golden phase came to an abrupt end when Robert, Gabriel's paternal grandfather, decided to intervene. He declared that it wasn't appropriate for his grandson to be raised by a gay couple. Using his family influence, he managed to convince other family members to support the change in custody. The transition to his grandparents' house marked the beginning of a series of changes that would gradually deteriorate Gabriel's life. Although the grandparents weren't abusive, the emotional stability he had known with his uncles was replaced by a more rigid and less affectionate environment. During this time, he lived with his older siblings, Ezekiel and Virginia, who also lived with the grandparents. The family dynamics in the grandparents' house was complex. Robert and his wife Sandra maintained a structured routine, but lacked the demonstration of affection to which Gabriel was accustomed. The boy, still, adapted as best he could. His sweet and resilient nature helped him find moments of joy, even in less ideal circumstances. During this period, Gabriel maintained a characteristic that would accompany him until his last days: his genuine concern for others. Even living far from the mother who had rejected him, he constantly asked his grandparents about her, wanting to know if she was okay, demonstrating extraordinary empathy for his age. Gabriel's life would change drastically in 2012 when Pearl Fernandez resurfaced with an apparently innocent proposal to take her son to a family barbecue. What should have been just an afternoon of togetherness revealed itself as a calculated ambush. Gabriel would never return to his grandparents' house. Behind the sudden display of maternal interest, there was a dark motive. Pearl had discovered she could receive substantial social benefits for each child under her custody. The same woman who had abandoned Gabriel 3 days after his birth now claimed him, not out of maternal love, but for financial interest. Gabriel's new home was an apartment in Palmdale, an area known for high crime rates. There, he found not only his mother but also Isoro Aguirre, her boyfriend, a man 6 feet and 1 inch tall and weighing over 265 pounds, who worked as a security guard. Isoro's intimidating presence would soon become a constant shadow in the child's daily life. The first weeks were marked by subtle changes in Gabriel's behavior. The always smiling and affectionate boy began showing signs of introversion. At Summerwind Elementary School, his teacher Jennifer Garcia noticed that he seemed more reserved, often lost in thought during classes. The initial signs of abuse began to appear gradually but unmistakably. One autumn morning, Gabriel arrived at school with a black eye. When questioned, he mechanically repeated the explanation he had been instructed to give. "I fell off my bicycle." Days later, he showed belt marks on his arms. With each new injury, a new excuse was offered, each less convincing than the last. The family dynamics in the house revealed themselves increasingly disturbing. Pearl and Isoro developed a perverse system of discipline, where Gabriel was punished for increasingly insignificant infractions. The couple began constantly questioning the boy's masculinity, using his supposed lack of virility as a pretext for increasingly severe punishments. School absences began to become frequent. Gabriel, who was previously an exemplary student, began missing days in a row. When he attended classes, he avoided physical activities and evaded during recess. His schoolwork, previously impeccable, began showing signs of neglect, not from disinterest, but from pure physical and emotional exhaustion. In November of 2012, a particularly alarming incident caught the school's attention. Gabriel appeared with partially shaved hair, in irregular tufts, and visible cuts on his scalp. His explanation, clearly rehearsed, convinced no one. But the system that should have protected him was already beginning to show its fatal flaws. The contrast between the Gabriel from before, loved by his uncles and protected by his grandparents, and the boy who now lived under Pearl's custody was shocking. In just a few months, his vibrant personality had been replaced by cautious and fearful behavior. Fear had become his constant companion. Meanwhile, Pearl and Isoro perfected their manipulation tactics. When social workers appeared for routine visits, they found an apparently normal house and a family that knew exactly what to say. Gabriel was instructed to lie, threatened with even worse punishments if he revealed the truth about his home life. The system of abuse was now fully established. The apartment in Palmdale, which should have been a home, had transformed into a private chamber of horrors, where an 8-year-old boy faced daily physical and psychological torture. The worst was yet to come, but the signs that something terrible was happening were already evident for anyone who wanted to see. This new phase of Gabriel's life wasn't just a return to his biological mother. It was the beginning of a nightmare that would only end tragically. The case of Gabriel Fernandez exposed a series of systemic failures in the Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services. More than 60 reports were registered in the months preceding his death, each representing a lost opportunity to save him. Teacher Jennifer Garcia became one of the few persistent voices in the system. After noticing disturbing patterns, she made more than a dozen documented reports. On one particularly alarming occasion, Gabriel confided in her that his mother had hit him with a belt buckle until he bled. Garcia immediately contacted social worker Stephanie Rodriguez, initiating what should have been an exhaustive investigation. A critical incident occurred when Arthur Miranda Martins, a Department of Social Services security guard, noticed cigarette burns on Gabriel's neck. Defying direct orders from his superiors, who didn't want to record the report because it was a Friday near the end of the workday, Martins persisted in seeking help. He contacted various departments, only to be repeatedly redirected through a labyrinthine bureaucracy. The home visits conducted by social workers followed a disturbing pattern. Instead of interviewing Gabriel separately or examining his body for injuries, they readily accepted Pearl and Isoro's explanations. During these visits, as later revealed, Gabriel was frequently hidden in a small cabinet, gagged to prevent noise. Supervisor Suzanne Harmony became a symbol of institutional negligence by preventing her team from recording reports after business hours, prioritizing administrative issues over child welfare. Her decision not to authorize overtime effectively blocked multiple intervention attempts. The Los Angeles Police Department also failed in its responsibilities. When officers finally visited the residence after multiple reports, they accepted Pearl's explanation that Gabriel was visiting relatives in Texas without any additional verification. This visit occurred just 1 week before his death. In a particularly disturbing revelation, it was discovered that crucial reports about police and social worker visits had been deliberately concealed from the prosecution during the subsequent investigation. An internal sheriff's department report, containing vital information about previous interventions, only came to light during the trial. Carmen Hernandez, an employee at the Antelope Valley Children's Center, discovered alarming letters written by Gabriel, suggesting suicidal thoughts. Instead of triggering emergency protocols, the case was treated as just another routine incident, resulting in only a brief home visit without consequences. The tragedy exposed a systemic pattern where professionals in positions of authority repeatedly chose the path of least resistance. Social workers didn't follow basic investigation protocols, supervisors blocked investigations over bureaucratic issues, and police accepted superficial explanations without verification. The case prosecutor would later reveal that the Department of Children's Services had developed a culture of concealment. Reports were frequently edited or lost, home visits were recorded incompletely, and critical alerts were ignored or minimized. In the 8 months that Gabriel was under Pearl and Isoro's custody, the couple developed a methodical system of torture that went far beyond discipline or physical punishment. The cruelty was calculated, ritualistic, and executed with a level of planning that shocked even experienced investigators. The small cabinet in the couple's bedroom became the epicenter of terror. It wasn't just a place of confinement, it was an improvised prison where Gabriel spent entire days. The space, smaller than a common chest, was locked with padlocks, and the boy was frequently handcuffed inside it. To prevent his screams from being heard during official visits, they used improvised gags made from socks and tape. Food was used as a form of psychological torture. Besides depriving him of regular meals, the couple forced Gabriel to ingest harmful substances, including used cat litter. When he finally received food, he was forced to eat quickly, standing up, while the rest of the family had normal meals at the table. Pearl and Isoro developed an elaborate system of punishments based on arbitrary infractions. Cigarette burns were the punishment for supposed lies. Prolonged cold showers were administered as treatment for visible bruises in an attempt to reduce swelling before school visits. Social isolation was meticulously planned. Besides frequent school absences, Gabriel was forbidden from playing with other children. When visits were inevitable, the couple developed an elaborate system of excuses and rehearsed explanations, which Gabriel was forced to memorize under threat of even worse punishments. A particularly disturbing aspect was the psychological component of the abuse. The couple focused on attacking Gabriel's identity and self-esteem, frequently ridiculing him for supposed feminine behaviors. Dresses were used as a form of humiliation, and homophobic insults accompanied the physical aggression. Medical documentation revealed a growing pattern of injuries. The first record showed isolated bruises, but over time, they evolved into a complex map of overlapping trauma. Fractures in different stages of healing indicated a systematic progression of violence. During post-mortem investigations, it was discovered that the couple maintained a photographic record of the abuse on their cell phones, not as accidental evidence, but as a perverse form of intentional documentation. The images revealed a chronological progression of Gabriel's physical deterioration. The manipulation of the system reached sophisticated levels. Pearl learned to schedule the most severe abuse to coincide with school holidays, allowing enough time for the most visible marks to diminish. She also developed an elaborate makeup system to cover bruises when necessary. Perhaps the most sinister aspect of the case was the couple's ability to maintain an appearance of normalcy for the outside world. They maintained regular jobs, participated in social events, and presented a facade of a functional family, while perpetrating unimaginable horrors inside their home. The medical examiner noted that Gabriel's thymus, a crucial gland in the child immune system, had significantly atrophied, a rare phenomenon in children and indicative of extreme and prolonged stress. This physical detail provided scientific evidence of the psychological terror that the boy endured in his last months of life. The criminal investigation of the Gabriel Fernandez case revealed layers of evidence that went far beyond the visible signs of abuse. When investigators entered the Palmdale apartment, they encountered a scene that required more than 60 evidence markers, a number so high that conventional red stickers ran out, forcing the use of yellow backup markers. The forensic analysis of the apartment revealed a dark story written in blood. Investigators used special ultraviolet light to detect traces of bodily fluids, revealing blood splatters on the walls, ceiling, and even behind furniture. In the small cabinet where Gabriel was kept prisoner, the stains told a silent story of prolonged suffering. One of the most disturbing findings was a baseball bat with an inscription in Spanish that said, "The drunk and the bastard will be removed from you." Laboratory analyses later confirmed that the object contained Gabriel's DNA at multiple points, suggesting repeated use as an instrument of torture. During searches, investigators found a set of handcuffs hidden in an underwear drawer. The wear marks on the handcuffs perfectly matched the scars on Gabriel's wrists, providing crucial physical evidence that corroborated testimonies about his confinement. Analysis of the couple's cell phones revealed a disturbing pattern of internet searches. Pearl had searched for information about forms of punishment that didn't leave visible marks, while Isaro had searched for psychological torture techniques. The text messages exchanged between them demonstrated not only knowledge of the abuse, but also a level of premeditated planning. Investigators discovered a hidden diary in Pearl's room, where she meticulously documented Gabriel's infractions and their respective punishments. The document, written in a mixture of English and Spanish, revealed an elaborate system of arbitrary rules and brutal consequences. The reconstruction of the final events was particularly revealing. Analysis of Pearl's cell phone history showed that she had made several calls before calling emergency services, including one to a lawyer. The interval between these calls and the request for help suggested that the couple had tried to create a cover story before seeking medical help. The crime scene investigation revealed that the location had been partially cleaned before the authorities arrived. Recently used cleaning products were found with blood stains, and several pieces of clothing had been recently washed. However, the rush in attempting to conceal evidence left crucial clues intact. One of the most innovative aspects of the investigation was the use of digital reconstruction technology. Investigators created a 3D model of the apartment, allowing prosecutors to visually demonstrate the impossibility of the explanations offered by the couple about the accidents that had allegedly caused Gabriel's injuries. The analysis of financial history revealed another sinister aspect of the case. Bank records showed that Pearl had begun receiving significantly larger social benefits after obtaining custody of Gabriel, establishing a possible financial motive for her actions. However, documented expenses showed that very little of this money was used for the children's welfare. The most surprising discoveries came from analyzing the family's electronic devices. Surveillance cameras installed in the apartment complex captured moments when Gabriel was forced to carry heavy objects as punishment, even while visibly injured. These images provided a crucial timeline to establish the progression of abuse. While physical and forensic evidence painted a clear picture of the horrors inflicted on Gabriel, investigators delved into an even more disturbing question. Who really were Pearl Fernandez and Isaro Aguirre? What could lead two people to commit acts of such cruelty against a child? The answer was buried in decades of medical records, psychiatric evaluations, and a pattern of behavior that developed long before the first act of violence against Gabriel. Pearl Fernandez's story begins long before the crimes against Gabriel. Medical records revealed a disturbing history of untreated mental disorders. Diagnosed with limited intellectual capacity, she showed consistently low results in cognitive tests since childhood. Later psychiatric evaluations identified a combination of depressive disorder, post-traumatic stress, and an abnormality in the right frontal lobe of the brain. Her childhood was marked by abandonment and violence. At age 11, Pearl ran away from home, citing maternal hatred as motivation. During adolescence, according to her accounts, she was the victim of a gang rape that lasted 2 days. This unprocessed trauma, combined with her untreated disorders, contributed to a pattern of abusive relationships that would repeat throughout her adult life. Isaro Aguirre presented an intriguingly different psychological profile. Before meeting Pearl, there were no records of violent behavior. On the contrary, his professional history as an elderly caregiver showed positive evaluations, with colleagues describing him as gentle and attentive. This duality in his behavior intrigued behavioral investigators. The dynamics between Pearl and Isaro represented a classic case of what forensic psychiatrists call folie à deux, or shared madness. In this phenomenon, a person with significant mental disorders, Pearl, influences a more psychologically submissive partner, Isaro, to participate in their delusions or deviant behaviors. In their case, this dynamic manifested in a progressive escalation of violence. Separate interrogations revealed distinct behavior patterns. Pearl demonstrated a remarkable capacity for manipulation, frequently altering her narrative to present herself as a victim of circumstances. Isaro, on the other hand, showed a tendency toward psychological submission, frequently citing Pearl as the source of decisions about discipline. A particularly revealing aspect was how the couple communicated about Gabriel. Recovered text messages showed that they had developed their own code to discuss the abuse, referring to it as lessons or training. This coded language suggested a level of complicity and premeditation that went beyond mere mutual influence. During psychiatric evaluations after arrest, Pearl demonstrated a consistent pattern of blame transfer. She alternated between minimizing her participation in the abuse and justifying it as necessary methods of discipline. Her ability to maintain this narrative, even in the face of overwhelming evidence, suggested a deep level of psychological dissociation. Isaro's behavior in prison revealed another facet of the couple's dynamics. His 2 suicide attempts, one by cutting his wrists and another by ingesting cleaning products, occurred after Pearl had cut off communication with him. This pattern suggested a deep emotional dependency, typical of the submissive partner in cases of folie à deux. The psychological investigation also revealed that the couple shared a morbid obsession with control and power. This fixation manifested not only in physical abuse, but also in elaborate rituals of humiliation and degradation. The particular focus on Gabriel's perceived sexual orientation suggested projections of their own conflicts and insecurities. Forensic experts identified an evolutionary pattern in the couple's dynamics. What began as a relationship of mutual dependency evolved into a sadistic partnership, where each reinforced and amplified the other's violent impulses. This escalation process is characteristic of cases of folie à deux, where social isolation and mutual validation create a cycle of increasingly extreme behavior. In the years following the conviction, analysis of the case by forensic psychology experts would highlight the crucial role that early mental health intervention could have played. Pearl's history of untreated disorders, combined with the isolated environment and toxic relationship dynamics, created perfect conditions for a tragedy that could have been prevented. From the psychological analysis of the perpetrators to the courtroom, the Gabriel Fernandez case entered its most challenging phase, the judicial process. The case was assigned to the Los Angeles Superior Court, where the prosecution made the rare decision to seek the death penalty for both defendants, a decision that reflected the exceptional gravity of the crimes. The process faced obstacles from the start. The Los Angeles legal community demonstrated unprecedented resistance to defending the couple. Several lawyers refused to accept the case, even as court-appointed public defenders. This mass refusal by experienced professionals was a silent testimony to the heinous nature of the crimes. A significant turning point occurred when Pearl's defense invoked the Atkins motion, claiming that her intellectual disability made her ineligible for capital punishment. This legal strategy, based on a Supreme Court precedent that prohibits the execution of people with mental disabilities, forced the separation of trials that would originally have been joint. In court, the prosecution developed an innovative strategy to present evidence. Instead of following a linear chronology, they organized the case in impact circles, starting with the moment of death and gradually expanding to reveal the layers of abuse that preceded it. This approach allowed the jury to comprehend the full extent of Gabriel's suffering. During the process, a series of secretly recorded audios from the jail revealed disturbing conversations between Pearl and Isaro. The recordings, obtained through surveillance equipment installed in their cells, captured discussions about the need to align their stories and revealed attempts to manipulate witnesses. Isaro's trial presented a particular challenge for the judicial system. His defense tried to characterize him as a manipulated follower, but the evidence of his active participation in the abuse was irrefutable. The jury had to consider not only his actions, but also his capacity to understand the criminal nature of his acts. A crucial moment in the process was when Judge Burt Bam made the unprecedented decision to allow the jury to visit the cabinet where Gabriel was kept prisoner. This decision, rarely granted in criminal cases, provided jurors with a visceral perspective of the victim's suffering. The sentencing phase brought up complex questions about justice and rehabilitation. The prosecution presented experts who testified about the rarity of cases where capital punishment was appropriate, arguing that this case represented precisely the type of extreme situation for which the death penalty was maintained in California. The impact of the trial extended beyond the courthouse. Daily protests occurred on the forum steps, with demonstrators demanding not only justice for Gabriel, but also systemic reforms in the child protection system. The case became a catalyst for legislative changes. A unique aspect of the process was the court's decision to allow cameras in the courtroom, a rare measure in cases involving child abuse. This unprecedented transparency allowed the public to witness not only the judicial process, but also the systemic failures that contributed to the tragedy. The final verdict came after exceptionally long deliberations. In November of 2017, Isaro was found guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstance of torture. The jury's decision for the death penalty wasn't immediate. It required several rounds of deliberation, with one juror initially reluctant, before reaching the required unanimity. Pearl, in turn, opted for a deal with the prosecution in June of 2018. By pleading guilty to first-degree murder and admitting the special circumstance of torture, she avoided the death penalty. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 4 years for aggravating factors. Additionally, both Pearl and Isaro received extra 10-year sentences for abuse against the other children in the family. The final sentence included an extraordinary statement from the judge, who described the case as the worst example of human cruelty he had witnessed in decades of magistracy. His final words were directed not only at the defendants, but at the entire system that failed to protect Gabriel. If this story touched you as it has touched so many others, share it so that more people can know and learn from it. Leave in the comments your opinion about how we can work together to prevent tragedies like this. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications to follow more cases that need to be remembered and discussed. Until the next video,